My name is Sarah Levin. I am the Director of Grassroots and Community Programs at the Secular Coalition for America, and I am very, very proud to introduce our presenters today and very grateful for them taking the time out of their evening to share their knowledge and expertise with all of us tonight. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce David and Jocelyn Williamson. Um, Jocelyn and David co-founded the Central Florida Freethought Community, an organization of atheists and humanists focused on the separation of church and state and building a thriving secular community in the greater Orlando area. They serve together on the board of directors of the CFFC. She is president and he is secretary. They are co-coordinators of the Florida Humanist Association's conference Free Flow, and they work hard to make sure Florida groups stay connected via the Florida Secular Leadership Summit, which I just went to. It was fantastic. David and Jocelyn were kind enough to host me there. All I'll say is you're going to be very impressed with the Secular Invocation program that they've been running in Florida. The point of this webinar is to introduce them as resources to you all. Tonight's webinar is not the end-all be-all. If you have further questions, if you decide to implement a program in your area, both of them are more than happy to share their contact information and advise you based on their expertise. So I do hope that the presentation is inspiring and motivates you all to consider doing something similar in your area. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Although, one more thing, sorry, housekeeping. For those of you who are logged in on a computer, you will notice that there is a chat box. So if you do have questions or comments that you'd like to share, you can throw them in there anytime during the presentation. And then at the end, Jocelyn and David will take time to answer questions. So please do hold your questions. You're muted, but you can put things in the chat box. And with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. All right. So we're excited about this program. It's been 4 years running and it's still going strong. We began the process more than 4 years ago, before the Supreme Court was expected to decide on the town of Greece versus Galloway in the spring of 2014. Tonight we'll talk about how, why, who, and what all is involved, as well as what you can do if you're denied the opportunity to participate in this process by your local government. And that's not uncommon. We won't spend much time on background, since that information is much more readily available online than what we'll be talking about here tonight. We're just going to give you what you need to get motivated and get started if you haven't already. All right, so your influence over your family and friends is pretty significant. Not much so for your neighbors and coworkers, but it's still pretty substantial. Of all the people that you regularly see, even if you can't change their minds, you can at least get their attention when you know them personally. But how do we gain influence outside these small groups? We can have that kind of influence through activism, and we do it even more effectively when we do it with individual groups or in coalitions. And the project we're talking about here can increase the influence that you and your organization have well beyond the current scope, and with direct impacts on your group's standing in the community and your ability to engage local lawmakers. When you do this work, your elected officials may get to know you by name. This program alone, in my opinion, has done more for us as an organization and locally in the eyes of the community members and elected officials than all of our other work combined. This isn't typical separation of state and church activism, and it doesn't accomplish all of our goals. But for these reasons, and for others, Jocelyn will explain shortly, the secular invocations that we've done have become a really large part of our work, and it's why we're doing them about every 3.5 weeks on average in Central Florida. So what's an invocation? For those who don't already know, they're usually about 1 to 3 minutes long, taking place before the Pledge of Allegiance and the regular business of the meeting. They usually ask for guidance or other blessings upon the city or county, the commissioners and the citizens. So it's typically and historically been a prayer, but this is not exclusively the case. Of course, most prayers invoke a God, but the prayers which you may see before other meetings or blessings given before a meal have been injected into government since the days when the church and the state were one and the same. And they've been happening in the U.S. Congress or in the Senate for as long as they have been meeting. in Washington, D.C. Local governments had adopted these over the years, particularly in areas where there's significant religious influence in politics and a dominant religious demographic. Generally, these are Christian and overwhelmingly Protestant invocations. So here's the data we've collected locally. This data fluctuates a little bit, the numbers increase, but the percentages really don't change a lot. This is not a comprehensive list, and it's not inclusive of every single meeting. Once we see a trend continuing, we dip back into that meeting and see how it's going. But the numbers don't change a whole lot. They just the percentages don't change a whole lot, just the increase in the numbers. And you can see on the left is the distribution of Florida population, which is very similar to the national average. And then on the right are the invocations that we've tracked locally. And you can see that they are overwhelmingly Protestant. So most of this research has been done by our members, in particular our board member, Joseph Richardson. So big thanks to him for that work. He's been involved in this since we began 4 years ago. So there are two decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue specifically. The 1983 Marsh decision, filed by State Representative Ernie Chambers, he's pictured on the left. He said that the decision said legislatures could have non-sectarian invocations, but did not address local meetings, like the ones we're talking about now. I think by the 2000s, this was largely being ignored, and state and local governments were having sectarian invocations. In other words, they could be in Jesus' name, or they didn't have to be, or they could be in Jesus' name, or they didn't have to be general in nature to some, just simple reference to God. On the right are the plaintiffs in the town of Greece versus Galloway decision. Linda Stevens is in the foreground with Susan Galloway behind her. They filed suit because the town was not following the law, and their 2014 decision directly addressed local meetings, and it said that prayers can be sectarian. But that Greece decision is thought of by most secularists and separationists as, including me, to be a loss, and this is certainly the case. The decision included the phrase, and I quote, "A minister or layperson of any persuasion, including an atheist, could give an invocation." So not a total loss by any means. I think even if that language were not there, we would have done the same activism. But that phrase really emboldened us and others, and I hear that a lot from attorneys and advocates, is that they actually called out the word atheist in this decision, which is kind of important. The week that the decision came out, we sent out about 20 letters to local governments that we had already investigated and determined that they were conducting invocations, and we requested our inclusion in the process alongside religious leaders. So since then, we've facilitated these in 5 counties, 14 cities and towns, and even one in the Florida House of Representatives this January. So a total of 62 so far, with many, many others around the state and around the country by other organizations and individual activists. We're keeping a list with video transcripts of every one of these on our website. But when the media attention waned, it was difficult to know where and when they were happening. So since December of 2015, we've only had our invocations on that page, but we still have all the historical invocations from before that, and we hope to begin tracking those across the country. I mention that because this is an excellent resource, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So who's doing these for us? We have humanist chaplains and humanist celebrants in the area. The Humanist Society offers this designation so that we as non-religious people can have an alternative to traditional religious weddings and memorials and other life cycle events. But not just humanist clergy are doing these. Overwhelmingly, the majority are done by regular folks in our community. And we know these folks from participating in our events. We keep track of kind of where everybody's from so that we can be in touch with them for local activism. And when we have an invocation opportunity in this particular town or county, we reach out to people that are there, or they'll reach out to us and we'll work together on that. So we couldn't do this without all of their help. It's not just the board of directors of the organization or a few advocates. It's really the entire group. So, but what happens if they say no, or if they delay in complying with our request? And we'll talk about that process a little bit more, and Jocelyn will dig into that. But if you hit a snag, and there will be times when you need some help, whether you're denied the opportunity or you find a prayer practice that's happening that doesn't seem appropriate. If you've got any questions, you can work with other local activists and groups that have some knowledge on this. It seems like every week we find new people in our area or in other parts of the state who didn't know what we were doing. So what we don't want to do is duplicate efforts, and we're hopeful that this project can be something that people can work together on, and not so much independently unless that makes sense, and sometimes it does for various reasons. Several of the Secular Coalition for America's member organizations have legal teams that can help. So look to them for advice and counsel when you need legal advice. take copious notes of the process. In fact, the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the American Humanist Association both were a large part of the startup of this project for us. And some of these organizations are even helping with ongoing litigation, and we'll talk about that. Just a note at the last group there, Americans United for Separation of Church and State is not a member organization from the Secular Coalition that I'm aware of. Sarah, please correct me if that's not the case, but they are an ally, and they certainly work very well with us in many instances and with our litigation. But you can report violations at these folks' websites. So about the issue that's happened with us locally in one of our jurisdictions, in August of 2014, we were denied access to one venue. The Brevard County Commission voted 3 times unanimously to reject our request. We requested it, the Anti-Defamation League sent a request saying that we should be permitted, and then our attorneys sent a request, and they voted unanimously 3 times. 2 different board makeups of 7 different commissioners voted against this. So several individuals and organizations joined together to continue to request access, and we were continually denied from when we started the process in 2014 all the way through 2015 when we filed suit in federal court. So our local group is also a chapter of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, so they were part of our legal team along with America United for Separation of Church and State, who is leading the litigation for us, as well as the ACLU of Florida and the National ACLU. As I said, the Anti-Defamation League also advocated on our behalf, and 2 local groups who joined us were the Humanist Community of the Space Coast and the Space Coast Freethought Society. So there were 5 individuals as well, along with those 3 local organizations that joined as plaintiffs in the case. We won in the district court for the 11th Circuit last fall, which is great. It didn't last long, though, because the county appealed. They did stop doing invocations, which is great for now. And all briefs have been filed in the case, and we're waiting on a court date for the fall of this year. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court will soon likely be less favorable than it was. I was previously hopeful, as were some of my co-plaintiffs as well as the attorneys, that this case might be precedent nationwide, but with Brett Kavanaugh as the current nominee, we are already considering potential negative consequences of a review at the Supreme Court level. So as we've heard far too much, or not often enough, but it's far too true in the last couple of years, as elections have consequences, and this is where we are. The law is on our side when it comes to keeping church and state separate, but that doesn't always mean that we can bring a lawsuit or necessarily that we would prevail in every case. So I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn to continue.
Okay. So David's been talking about invocation in general, and I'm now going to talk about some of the specifics with giving invocations. To begin with, I would recommend determining if you're doing this individually or on behalf of an organization. If you're doing this as an organization, recognize that invocations provide an opportunity to be both a community building and an activist event. This can be a great way for an organization to start or even get re-energized. The CFFC actually started as an activist organization. David and I and others, we were really passionate about state-church separation, and we had some people join us. But within a year, it really became apparent that we needed greater community support for our long-term success. And that there was this need in the community for, atheists and humanists to meet up and just have this community presence. And I will say, in my experience, very few people in our organization actually have the time and interest in being an activist. And it's great to have their support, but because of this, we've become a community and an activist organization with each side of, benefiting the other. Community development has been the cornerstone in building successful activism with a variety of initiatives that we've undertaken. Our success has come from consistency in events that serve the purpose of creating friendships. We're aiming to provide a variety in our events which serve a broad range of needs with people, different people on a regular basis. Consistency, variety, and most of all, quality should be the basis of events that we're planning. You want to create an environment where people know they can count on the event occurring, that the event is well managed, where the attendees can get to know each other. And as a result of this, they're going to show up, they're going to participate more often, And because of this, when it comes time to ask people to donate time or money or both, people will step up and they'll want to help because they get a lot out of the events that you're planning. But getting people to do more than just come out and hang out is a challenge. So, like any organization, we struggle to get a reliable group of activists. So we try to make it fun and rewarding for everyone that does get involved. And this has really helped to develop our work with providing invocations at local government meetings. When I talk to our members about secular invocations, and I've had these conversations many times over the past few years, I get mixed responses. People say to me, why do you even want to do this? Why do we want there to be invocations? What's the purpose of our involvement? Aren't you just supporting religion by doing this instead of protesting? And my response to this hits a few points. First, as David mentioned, the Supreme Court ruled that invocations are permitted if they follow certain guidelines. So we cannot demand the shutdown under law. They will continue in some cases, even if we flat out protest and get enough support to change policy in this way. Some organizations are conducting protest invocations, and that's going to be a little bit different. We're not one of those organizations. Not all city councils and county commissions have invocations, but in our area, most of them do. Some of them only have a moment of silence. And I would say, yeah, you're right. I don't want there to be invocations at these meetings, but if they are happening, I am going to be there and I do want to participate. Secondly, if prayers will continue at these meetings, our viewpoint should be included. These events and the attention they get can be such a wonderful way to actively engage with local government for relatively little effort. Every time I give an invocation, everyone in the room is standing up while I share a positive, secular message of inclusiveness and diversity with an audience that really usually has little to no idea what secular humanism is. And in my opinion, atheists doing invocations is not supporting religion. This is demonstrating in a clear and tangible way that invocations can be inclusive, positive, and uplifting without a reference to God. So here are a few of the primary benefits that I think are just too good to pass up. First, we are educating elected officials, all in attendance, about humanist values. We are testing the forum for equal protection to ensure compliance with the ruling. As we do this, we're normalizing the participation of non-believers in local government meetings. And lastly, you should attempt to engage with local media about your message of inclusion and diversity. You can, a lot of times, get some write-ups about it, which is great for your organization. All right, so let's talk about how we get started actually doing this. First, you want to identify the incorporated cities and counties in the area where local governments likely exist. I didn't realize, but now I do. Not every town with a name has a local government. You then want to figure out where you can reasonably drive to and where you have members living. And I say that because sometimes you'll say, oh yeah, this city over here, it's only an hour and a half away, we can make it. If nobody wants to drive there, don't put that at the top of your list. So you then want to check out the city or county website to see if you can get information from agendas or the minutes of the meetings. A lot of times you're going to see that the city will have their meetings available online, and it's going to be super easy for you to review these. If you don't find that, then you can call them, and you want to always take notes on whoever you talk to and whatever they're saying. A lot of times, not a lot, but often you're going to see video being available. You can easily see whether invocations are done so long as they don't start the video after the invocation. And you want to be sure to check back every several months, particularly a few months after elections, since we've seen that policies and practices can change as a result of that. Next, request a copy of the guidelines for giving invocations if they have them. If not, then you should presume that anyone can give an invocation in accordance with the Supreme Court's decision. You then want to see who's doing the invocation. If they're having different people provide invocations, then they're probably going to have guidelines or practices that they're following, and there may be a list of invocators that you can actually request. The clerk who plans the meetings may be able to provide this information, or you may need to do an open records request, just FYI. And this is a lot easier than it sounds. Some cities are going to require residency of the invocator or the organization that they represent. If it is a government official or employee or the same person each time giving the invocation, you definitely have a potential violation. So at that point, you might want to step back and get some of the legal advice that David mentioned, you know, at the AHA's Humanist Legal Center or the FFRF legal team, something like that. And if they have a moment of silence or nothing at all, you have nothing to do. So you can walk away from that city. We don't want them to start having an invocation because most of the time this would be a prayer. Lastly, no religious prayer should be occurring at school board meetings. Again, you can contact the AHA's Humanist Legal Center or other legal centers if this is the case. And with all of this, I can't underline this enough, take copious notes on the names and dates of the people you speak to. You want to keep all written and electronic communication. Once you're all, you're ready to get involved and put the request based on the guidelines provided, put it in writing, and make sure that it's part of the official record. It may be that the city or county only requests invocation volunteers at the beginning of the year, so be aware of that. We learned kind of, we came in mid-year and then they're like, well, we filled up the whole season. So you find out when it needs to be, put it on your calendar. If they need all their requests, during December, then make sure it happens. You want to ask questions, learn the process if it's unclear. Most importantly, be friendly. Don't assume that whoever is on the other side is not supportive. They're doing their job. They may be on your side about this issue. You just don't know. And once you begin doing invocations, you're usually in contact with these people regularly, so build a rapport. Every time I communicate on behalf of the CFFC, I am representing secular humanists and atheists. I don't assume anything about the person I'm talking to. And just like everyone else who has a job, they're probably overworked and underpaid, and I may be the first person who has openly shared their non-belief with them, so I am always extremely polite. And if the first request is not responded to, try again in a few weeks. Email does, things do get lost. If still no response, call and just politely request the information via the telephone. Now, we have provided a sample letter. You can find that at tinyurl.com/invocation letter. Now, you're just going to pop your information in and you should be pretty good to go. This was originally developed with the assistance of Monica Miller at the Humanist Legal Center. It's really worked well for us. And again, keep in mind that local governments schedule these on an annual basis, so coming in at the right time of year is important. And don't be upset if when they do respond, they say, you know what, we can see, you can give an invocation in 6 months. If you're getting a schedule date, that's terrific. Mark your calendar, follow up. Don't miss any follow-up, and whatever you do, don't forget to put this on your calendar, your group calendar, set up reminders for the person doing the invocation, things like that. Well, once they schedule your organization to deliver an invocation, you need to select someone to actually give it. Now, more than that, one person can write the invocation, so you just need someone who can read it at the meeting. You also need to confirm who is expected to give the Pledge of Allegiance. Some meetings have the invocator give the pledge, and we've learned, and we have a lot of our members who do not want to do this. So you want to plan in advance what makes the invocator comfortable and what the city or county expects, and how you're going to be passing it back to the commission or the council to give the pledge. And my advice, honestly, would be to stand there or stand at your seat while this is happening. We don't treat this as an opportunity to do activism on the pledge, but any of your members or others who attend certainly should not feel compelled to stand if they don't want to. But that's just my own advice for the invocator. That's, again, goes in with my happy, friendly, polite approach. Ideally, your invocator should be a resident. They should be someone that's comfortable with public speaking. They don't have to recite the invocation. They're just reading it. Not much more is needed. The CFFC has given a lot of invocation in the same places. And so we actually try to have a variety of people offer invocations. This is a terrific opportunity to demonstrate your diversity and engage those people that you think need a boost into activism or leadership. The invocation itself is less than 2 minutes long typically, and there are dozens of examples on the CFFC website. So if you don't want to write one from scratch, you can just pick and choose, take parts of the different invocations and put them together. The Humanist Society has an entire section of their website dedicated to this, as well as some examples in their celebrant handbook. For the invocation itself, you want to keep it under 2 minutes. You want to read it aloud to time yourself and get feedback from others if you can. You want to be professional in your presentation and keep it positive. The purpose, as I see it, is to get everyone in the room just to pause for a moment and focus on the task at hand. While you may feel very strongly that you want to lecture them on their recent holiday display, this is not the place for this. There are public comment periods that are set up for that type of conversation. The invocation is really the place, ideally, to bring the team together in unity. You want to get the entire room to put their phones away, forget about their day, get ready, and into the task at hand on behalf of their fellow citizens. I'll say I've actually evolved a bit, in my own approach with invocations. I used to feel deep down that this was an opportunity to educate people on the finer points of separation of state and church. I now believe that the greater long-term good is going to come from having a strong, clear, uplifting message that succinctly demonstrates how powerful secular values really are. If the city has not prevented you from having your turn at giving an invocation, then why are you lecturing them? When scheduling, a lot of times they're going to give you a choice. I would recommend looking at holidays and events in the city or county. I gave an invocation for the city of Orlando the day after Arnold Palmer died. I don't play golf. I don't know very much about him, but I did research. It was appropriate for me to quote him during this invocation. When requesting dates, consider freethought dates like Darwin Day, Freethought Day, Earth Day, International Women's Day, National Day of Reason, and without being negative, use these dates as a focus for the invocation. Keep in mind that the city or county officials are listening, but also so is every citizen in the room and everyone who ever watches the video. The CFFC has actually found new members from people who were in the audience and they heard our invocations. I recommend always having leadership in the organization or whoever you've designated to be kind of organizing this to double check the invocation before it's given as well. The invocator is presenting on behalf of the group, and as such, I would encourage you to consider that messaging needs to be managed to make sure that it's matching your organization's mission, vision, goals, and values. And again, it's nice to double check, for the general flow and in general, I would say that's a good practice for any presentation that would be given. On the day of the invocation, arrive at least 15 minutes early and plan to take extra time to park. In some large cities, they actually reserve a spot for you. In some cases, you can park in the clergy parking spot, and that's always a good photo opportunity. The invocator should introduce themselves when they arrive to the clerk or deputy clerk. They want to confirm the order of events, ensure that they know how the Pledge of Allegiance is going to be given. And after it's finished, sometimes the cities or counties will send thank you notes. And, how cool would it be if they got a thank you note email card from you and your organization for having that opportunity? That's just something to think about. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning, make this more than activism. Make this a social event for your group. If it is a morning invocation, schedule breakfast or coffee before or after. If it's in the evening, go to dinner or drinks afterwards. Keep in mind that these invocations are a service to your community. It means making a positive difference for the person, the people, the agency receiving the benefit. It entails truly understanding what is needed, your genuine compassion for the community that you share, and a commitment to being reliable and following through. For the CFFC, as a service-minded and activist humanist organization, we focus on our responsibility to make a positive difference in the community, and we provide opportunities for kind, compassionate members of the non-faith community to serve together, and invocations can really do that. Invocations are an easy, effective form of activism to engage with your local community. As I mentioned before, this may be the first time that someone hears a non-prayer invocation, or the first time that they know they've heard an atheist or humanist speak. So make it memorable. I'm going to share with you one experience that I've had with invocations. The CFFC requested to be part of the invocations in Castleberry, Florida. And during this time, the city of Castleberry was also considering changing from invocations to a moment of silence. So myself and Joseph Richardson, who's another board member, we went to speak at the meeting where the city was discussing this. And each of us had our 3 minutes prepared. We talked about the value of a moment of silence, the potential lack of inclusion for invocations. And only one other person spoke from the audience, and this was a young, self-described religious man who also spoke on the value of a moment of silence at this meeting. No one else came forward. But each of the commission members stood up and gave their opinions. One commission member, an older Jewish woman, spoke for over 15 minutes on how in the past 8+ years of being on the board, she felt excluded. She read articles that supported this. She had letters to the city supporting this. She was so incredibly passionate in her presentation. All of the other board members spoke in favor of invocations, and in the end, the vote was such that invocations remained. The CFFC is now giving regular invocations in this city, and I will tell you, every time I go there, I am speaking for that board member. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, when we return, I think about the words and the tones that we're using. I think about how I need to represent the entire constituency just for 2 minutes. It is my responsibility to be the most inclusive I can be. And I want all the people who ever hear this invocation to feel they're part of the city and that they're glad that we're there alongside them. Okay, I'm going to say that that's all that we've got for you guys tonight. And Sarah, I think you want to moderate some questions, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I am going to change it to Q&A mode. So our participants, you should be able to speak. Does anyone have questions or comments, or just want to say thank you? Last call for questions. Oh, I see Rory is typing a question. Rory, we can't hear you, but you can type your question or your comment. We can give you just a few more seconds if you want to type out your question.
While he's typing that, Sarah, I just want to point out one thing that I thought about while Jocelyn was speaking. You know, we are strong advocates for separation of state and church, but we have kind of agreed as a board and as organizers of this event that advocacy for separation of state and church is only part of what we do. And I think she did a good job of explaining that. But I would only want to say that we're not acquiescing to the idea that this is a problem when we participate in it. I think it's important to realize that we have to do more than just separate state and church. We actually have to build something up in the place of what we're pulling apart, which is, you know, religion out of government. We need to replace that with something at times, and this is one of those times where I think that's helpful. Okay, so I'll read your question, Roy, for those who may not be reading that. We've had some success with invocations at the Iowa State House. How do I approach my own legislator for the first time? That's fantastic. And Sarah, I will certainly let you go first if you've got some thoughts on that.
Sure, yes. So I actually think it's great that you have, you kind of have a way to introduce yourself there. If you've never spoken to or requested a meeting with your legislator, I would recommend reaching out to the staff, if they have staff. I know in smaller states they don't always have staff, but I imagine they probably do in Iowa. And request a meeting with your legislator. If you have other constituents that are in the area who you could go with, that would be even better. So try to get some folks in your area to come with you. Request a meeting, and in that intro email, introduce who you are, however you identify, whether you're a humanist constituent, make sure you mention that you're a constituent. And I know, Rory, you're very, very involved in the community there, and so I would share with this, with whomever you're requesting a meeting, you want to tell them what you'd like to discuss, and you'd want to think about some issues in your state that are relevant to church-state separation, or maybe just an issue you care about as a constituent, but you still want to make sure that you have something that you're asking to meet about. And in that introduction, you want to add a little bit about yourself, your involvement, the local organizations you're part of, and I would certainly maybe link to any articles or videos that you might have and mention, you know, by the way, these organizations I'm involved with locally have done X, Y, and Z, doing invocations at the State House, because that kind of signals that, hey, we're organized, we've been involved, I'm part of this bigger constituency, so I'm not just requesting a meeting on behalf of myself, but you know, I'm a representative and a member of this greater secular constituency. And I always encourage folks to, when they do request a meeting, of course, to have a specific issue or bill to discuss, but also to mention that you'd like to discuss inclusion of non-theists, because all of these meetings, any meeting, any touch that you have with the lawmaker is an opportunity to educate them about the secular community, about the humanist community, whatever community that you're a part of. And David, do you want to, or Jocelyn, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so Jocelyn and I were just talking while you were explaining that. I think that I'm glad I let you go first, because you were reaching out and touching legislators is you know, kind of your professional work. So that was an excellent lead into what I'll say next, which is what we did here in Central Florida was we actually had a representative, Latinx representative, first Hispanic gay man in the Florida legislature, who invited us to nominate someone to do an invocation. But that actually began a year before. As soon as he was elected, after we said congratulations to this is someone who we knew from the progressive activism community, we said, hey, invocations occur in the State House. Let us know if we can participate. And he was primed, and his staff reached out to us the second year he was in office when he was asked if he had anybody to nominate. So we kind of set that up in advance with him, but it could have gone any number of ways, and I think Sarah described the next way to do that. Secondly, Jocelyn made a point here. We've only got one headset, so I'm going to just say it for her. But she said, you know, we track where our members live by zip code. We don't want addresses. You know, we're not sending, you know, mail and knocking on doors, but we want to know where people live, so that if there is a progressive or a state church, a secularist in the legislature that is not in your area, find someone that's in their area who can ask that person about doing an invocation. There's no way we would have been able to do an invocation in Pensacola, or for, I should say, a representative or a senator from Pensacola. We had to do one for Orlando. We might be able to do one for Miami or Tampa, you know, those types of things. So just because your representative won't permit it or your state senator won't permit it doesn't mean that you can't use this opportunity to find another representative or senator to open the door for you, someone else in your community.
I think you should be able to hear me now. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, good. Thanks so much. I figured it out. That's good advice. Thank you.
You bet. And I'll go ahead and read Ruth's question. I'm in Iowa. The humanists in Cedar Rapids have done them a couple of times. That's fantastic. I think Justin Scott is someone that's in Iowa that I'm very familiar with, and he's been a fan of our work, and we're certainly a fan of his, and he's back at it again with the elections coming up. So, fantastic. Yeah, and Jocelyn's family's from Iowa, so and she knows we need all the help we can get there.
Oh, you got it going here in Iowa.
Very good.
Any other
Sarah?
questions?
Go ahead.
All right, well, we have contact information on the last slide here, so if you want to follow up with David or Jocelyn to ask more questions, please do. I want to thank you, David and Jocelyn, for a great presentation. It is going to be shared far and wide so that folks can revisit, and what I love most about it is really the nuts and bolts, because that's where folks get tripped up. They might like the idea of doing something, but they might be intimidated by, well, how do I start? How do I do it in the best way positive? Speaking of positivity, I love the emphasis on that. So just wanted to thank you both for taking the time to do this and for all the great work you do on the ground. And that's all we have for today, folks. So thank you to the participants for joining and engaging. And with that, I'll say good night.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, William, or David, and Jocelyn, and Sarah.
So happy to
Thank
be
you.
here. Thank you.